I decided to round it up to 5 stars because fuck it, you know, why not? Sometimes you just want to fucking enjoy a book, okay? And sometimes you gotta bump up your Goodreads average rating. So 5 stars it is. Hi, before I get into this video, I do want to make a quick announcement that for PAPERCUT Book Club, Kat and I have switched months because September is a very busy month for Kat. She didn't want to host 2 live shows, so she asked to switch months with me. The book that I have chosen is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. We will be having our live show on September 28th, which is a Saturday, at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will also have a link in the description so that you can figure out what that means in your time zone. If you're not able to get your hands on this book, there will still be a non-spoiler section in the beginning of the live show where we will also be doing a giveaway for people who attend. So if you join the live show, you will be eligible to receive this book. I will pick a winner to mail this out to, and maybe I'll also even put post-it tabs on the sides for my favorite quotes as I read along too. With that out of the way, I want to talk about all of the books I read for the month of August. For this month, I had also participated in Mythathon and Disneyathon. I was the co-host for Team Hades for Mythathon, which means that it was super easy to read through the whole readathon because I only had to read 2 books. And then for Disneyathon, I ended up failing that one just by missing one particular book. This is why readathons that don't allow you to combine challenges or cut corners suck. I'm just kidding. I know they worked very hard on it, and it is like a cute, fun readathon, but I'm just saying, I wish these readathons didn't ostracize underachievers like me. The first book that I read for August was actually not part of any of the readathons at all, but I just felt like reading a short nonfiction book, so I picked up I Might Regret This by Abby Jacobson. This author is the creator and writer for Broad City, which is a sitcom on Comedy Central. I think that the only audience for this book are really people who have watched the show. Otherwise, I don't really know why anyone who doesn't know Abby Jacobson would care enough to read her memoir. This is a series of essays that she has put together when she went on a road trip from New York to California. This was a cross-country road trip that she took a while back when she was dealing with some difficulties in her life. She had just experienced her first heartbreak because up until that point, she had never really fallen in love with anyone. And then when she finally did, it was actually with a woman. And she didn't know before then that she was even attracted to women. It was like this big roller coaster relationship for her that unfortunately ended, and she was very heartbroken, and then she decided to just fucking eat, pray, love this shit and just go cross country. She put together pretty much her thoughts throughout the trip and documentation about what she did during the trip into this little book here. I rated this book 3 stars because I thought that it was just okay. Since I had been watching the show for a while, it was nice to get a little bit more acquainted with one of the brains behind the show. It kind of added more depth to her as a person because you really get to see all the things that she's insecure about and all the things that she gets anxiety over, and a lot of it is very relatable. It's very much like a liberal millennial in New York City, still trying to figure out her life and figure out herself and figure out her relationships. It is kind of double-edged sword because on one hand, yeah, it is like relatable because everybody feels lost and everybody feels that way, but on the other hand, it's like nothing really new has really come out of it because, again, everybody feels that way. I just didn't find there to be any plot or cohesion at all, which you could argue is true to how real life is. If you're going on a road trip to kind of like figure out what to do and figure out who you are or whatever, sometimes you don't get any answers for that. And sometimes you just have an experience and that's it. There's no like grand revelation, and that's fine, but it's like, why? Like, why should I even bother reading this? It just felt like reading a diary, but not reading like an actual book with purpose. So I'm like, girl, where is your thesis? Where is this going? Where are you going? Maybe that's a point because she doesn't know where she's going. And I'm like, you know what? That's fine. I appreciate your journey and I love that journey for you, but it ain't that interesting. There are a couple of essays that are called sleep studies. They are written to be more as like a stream of consciousness. I want to read this one part that I tabbed. I wonder if I could just pick up and move to a random city where I knew no one and begin again. I think I could. I guess anyone could. I don't want to, but it's nice to know I could. I could be okay. And man, something about it, I was like, Bitch, me too. The next book that I read is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. This is the group book that was chosen for both Team Hades and Team Tangled for Mythathon and Disneyathon respectively. So I decided to read it as one of the first books of the month to get it over with. While I'm usually not like a fan of Beauty and the Beast retellings, I still found it to be pretty solid in the sense where the strongest part about this book is that the characters and the relationships are really well developed. This is a story about Harper, the main character, who lives in Washington, D.C. She has cerebral palsy, and because of that, a lot of people underestimate her. One day, she gets transported into the fantasy world because she sees this strange man about to kidnap a girl, and she jumps in to try to save her. But it turns out that he was only trying to get the girl because he was trying to find the next contender who might be able to break the curse. Because in this fantasy world, there is a prince who has been cursed for hundreds and hundreds of years to turn into a monster that is capable of killing other people in the kingdom, including his own family. So they've been trying to break the curse for a long ass time. She ends up being in their lives, and then the story goes on in standard Beauty and the Beast fashion. I rated this 4 stars because, again, I think the main strengths about this book are the characters. I really enjoyed all 3 of the characters that are featured here. Harper in particular is a great character because she has a realistic blend of being both strong in her own way, but also very doubtful of her own self as well. And I think that's what makes you like a human being, because you can't just be like a whiny ass bitch. Well, I guess you can, but you're not like a very compelling main character if you are. But you also can't be like this badass bitch either, because that's just not realistic. I liked that she was a little bit of both. I also like that there was a choice to make her have cerebral palsy, because that was actually the only reason why I decided to pick up this book. Otherwise, it would have been a very standard Beauty and Beast retelling. But because the author chose to make the main character have a disability in a fantasy setting, it added like another layer for why the main character feels like an outsider to society, because that's how disabled people are often treated. While the story didn't revolve around her disability, and while the conflicts weren't about like, oh no, I'm disabled, it was more so to add like context to her character and where she came from and some of the hardships that she had gone through. And so I liked that. And another thing that I liked about her character was that she had a very good head on her shoulders, because throughout this book there is some political tension throughout the story, and I really liked how there were political stakes that were brought up in the book, like being afraid that the country would go to war or the kingdom would be invaded, and planning what to do in the event of an invasion. Harper really stepped up to be someone who made a good diplomatic partner in that sense. Thanks to the political aspects of the book, that helped it ground it in reality compared to like just 2 random people falling in love in a castle. The other perspective that we get to read about is the prince, who is named Ren. He has a lot of inner conflicts about himself. I mean, usually if you end up killing your family whenever you turn into a furry, that ends up giving you some angst to kind of mull over. But beyond that, I thought it was interesting how a lot of his headspace and the way that he operates is always calculating something. He always thinks one step ahead or several steps in advance. And that's how he has approached politics and ruling the kingdom. And that's how he has approached romance as well. One example of this is that the main character, Harper, asks him about the other girls, and she says, "Did you ever come close?" Meaning that, you know, has the curse ever come close to being broken? He replied, "Sometimes victories seem very close, other times miles away." And then she replies, "You just said victory. You didn't say love." And since we're reading his perspective in this chapter, it says, "I'm not sure I have a response to that. My initial reaction is to ask why that matters." And so I think this dynamic is really interesting because it adds a lot more depth to the beast, where you're kind of constrained with this pressure to fall in love. But you could argue that if you feel forced to fall in love to prevent, you know, fucking murdering your entire kingdom and killing your family, is that really love though? I don't know. And so I enjoyed the way that he viewed relationships as a means to his goal of breaking the curse, rather than something like, ooh, I want to fall in love with a babe. And at the same time, that adds distrust from Harper's perspective because she knows that he's not being authentic. He's just being pragmatic and calculating. So that's like an interesting dynamic that I came to appreciate about those two, because then they have to like build up their trust, and as they get closer together, they gotta figure out like, is this actually real, or is this just like planned, or do we just feel pressure to be this way because the lives of hundreds of people are on our shoulders? I feel like a lot of Beauty and the Beast retellings just have the girl and the guy being very lovey-dovey with each other, and they just chill in a castle and that's it. What was nice about this book was that there were actual political tensions, there were actual stakes. Plus, the curse of being a beast was legitimately very scary and threatening, because it's not like he's a furry now, he's like a furry that can kill people. So, you know, shit was getting real. The reason why I am not rating it 5 stars is because I found the story to be very, very, very predictable. There are some ways that the original story was subverted a little bit because the characters were developed more. But beyond that, it's still very straightforward. There were so many missed opportunities for it to really deviate and become even better than the original story. The way that the author approached the romance and relationships could have been rewritten differently in a way that would have been way better. And I want to talk about this in a separate video review because I have a lot of thoughts and I have a lot of things that I want to yell about. I gotta do my character Gray justice. We'll talk about it in that other review. And because it was predictable, I found there to be no reason why this bitch is like 500 pages. If you are gonna make a story very straightforward and predictable, there's no reason for it to be 500 pages. It needs to be like 300 pages max. The next book that I read is The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. This is the book choice for PAPERCUT book club when it was Jordan Harvey's turn, because this is Jordan's favorite book ever. I also chose this book to fulfill the challenge of reading a book with glowing reviews for Team Tangled. This is a fantasy story that is based on the original Goose Girl tale. Basically, there is a princess who will one day become queen of her kingdom. She had a peculiar childhood growing up because she grew up with an aunt who knew that they both kind of had these powers where they could talk to animals and be able to understand them. And there was tension for her growing up because people would freak out if they knew that she could talk to animals. Like there's this scene, I think in the first chapter of the book, where she and her nursemaid are chilling on like a grassy hill, and then they see a duck or something like that, and then she starts talking to the duck, and then the nursemaid is so freaked out by it that she literally rips the grass from the ground and fucking throws it at her like she's a freak. So people have like no chill when you talk to animals whatsoever. I really feel like, you know how there was that one kid in school that always barked like a dog or meowed like a cat at other people for no reason? This is like the kind of book that was written for them. The mom is also upset that she talks to animals, and that is the reason why the mom sends the aunt away, because she's like, you are a bad influence to my daughter. A princess should not behave like this. My daughter will not be a furry. So the main character has to keep this affinity pretty low key and just try to be like a proper princess as one would, which I guess in this case is a boring bitch who doesn't talk to animals. Lame. Later, when she is a teenager, she finds out that she is in an arranged marriage with this prince from another kingdom. She's going on this little road trip to meet the prince and be wed to him. But on her trip, she feels like something is not right. Like something really sketchy is happening. Turns out that the army of people who are coming along with her, half of them have actually made plans to fucking shank a bitch. And so they nearly try to kill her, but she's able to escape. Turns out the reason why they betrayed her is because Celia, who is her maid, actually plotted to take over her place as queen. Celia is like this bitch who she thought was a friend, but it turns out that she's just a fake bitch who wanted to be a princess all along. And all of this time she has been very resentful that the main character has like a nice privileged life. And so the main character has to run away and escape, and then has to live like a low-key life as a goose girl. She kind of explores and discovers the world through the eyes of being like a normal girl instead of a sheltered princess. I rated this book 3 stars, even though it is Jordan's book. She was very hurt that I felt very lukewarm about the book, but that's just how it be, you know? I did realize from reading it that early 2000s YA fantasy or middle grade fantasy is just not for me. There's just something about the storytelling back then and the writing style back then that is a total miss for me. Objectively speaking, it is, you know, a very earnest and unproblematic story. There's a lot of sweet parts about this book that I think a young girl would enjoy. The main character does go through development, a naive, privileged little bitch, and then she becomes like a stronger, badass bitch. And it's like, you know, I love that journey for you. She also has a love interest who is not problematic, and the romance is more of like a subplot to the book rather than the main thing. She also finds like a cute friendship group. There's like good aspects of the story. It's just still not for me. I found myself to be bored a lot from it. And I was trying to think about like, why am I bored from this shit? Like, I know that I'm just a dumb bitch who cannot appreciate art, but why else would I be bored from it? And I realized that it's because usually what I like from a fairy tale retelling or a retelling in general is if it were to subvert something or provide something new. The Goose Girl was a very straightforward, linear type of storytelling. It made me feel bored because it wasn't providing something that was new to me. The last few pages got more exciting and fast-paced, but other than that, I found the whole thing to be very slow and boring. I'm sorry, Jordan. We talked about it more in the live show with Kat and Zach. So if you do want to hear more in-depth thoughts about the book and how other people have appreciated the book, you can check out the live show. But really, this just wasn't for me, and that's okay. I didn't want to be reading too much fantasy YA in a month, so I decided to switch it up by reading Beauty by Sagmeister and Walsh. This actually came in a little box set here, and the craftsmanship of the book and the layout of the book is really nice. I'll have to cut to a clip where I flip through the pages so you can see what I mean here. The book is very aesthetically pleasing, which is no surprise because it is a design book that was created by a New York agency called Sagmeister and Walsh. They are a really great design firm that I have been following for a while. The two of them decided to put together this book because they wanted to make the argument that despite most of society only valuing function, they wanted to argue that beauty is just as important as function. And if anything, beautiful things can make something more functional. This is something that I think we are not used to believing. Our interpretation is that something is beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, it is not something that is necessarily useful. So it was interesting for these two designers to make the argument that actually by making something beautiful, it is better. So these are kind of like essays that they have put together arguing about what is beauty, what is the history of beauty, how do we experience beauty, what are like various examples of beautiful things around the world. And these are all kinds of things. They can be sculptures, they can be architecture, they can be graphic design posters, they can even be something as abstract as colors. What is the most beautiful color? It's basically like if you are an art history nerd, I think you would like jizz over this book. It was very interesting that this book challenged a modern perspective of how we view design. The strongest point about this book is definitely the layout and visuals of it. I love the different cover pages that are throughout the book. I love the different examples that they pulled up. Because of that, I decided to rate the book 4 stars. I'm leaning more towards 3.5 in terms of my own personal preference, but because my average Goodreads rating is quite low, I'm just gonna bump it up to 4 stars. The reason why I can't rate it 5 stars is because even though the book is gorgeous, it lacks analytical depth. A lot of their research comes from these Instagram polls that they put together about like vote for what is the most beautiful color or vote for what is the most beautiful shape. It could add like an interesting perspective, but it's very limiting because it is just biased Instagram poll from your audience that is of a certain demographic. Also, it kind of implies that beauty is something that has to be a majority vote by people, when I would argue that is not necessarily the case all the time. And also, whenever they made an argument about how effective beauty can be and how beauty can enhance something or fulfill a business goal for your project, they provided anecdotes, which I did enjoy, but I wish they expanded more upon that. So basically, I just wish there was a bit more meat to this book other than just pretty visuals, rather than romantic, poetic writing of the value of beauty. I would have liked to see more in-depth like case studies for how making something beautiful really helped a specific project or a specific goal. I do think that if you are a designer or an art hoe, it is a book that is worth checking out because it's just nice to look at pretty things and be reminded that it's okay to strive to make something pretty, and it's not less useful because it is pretty. So just embrace your art hoe. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention that this book fulfilled the prompts for Disney-a-thon where you had to read a book with a beautiful cover. So what better book to pick than a book that's literally about beauty? And then lastly, the final book that I read for the month is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. This is a book that fulfilled the last challenge that I had for Team Hades, which was to read a book that has been shelved for a long time. This has been on my TBR since last year and I've been itching to read it, but I just never got around to it for some reason. I know this fulfilled some other challenge for Disney-a-thon too, but I don't remember what that challenge was. But it doesn't matter because I failed the Disney-a-thon anyway. I tried, okay? I was so close, but it's not my fault that I'm a slow reader, okay? So anyway, The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. This is a creepy little gothic story that is about Frankenstein, the classic that we all know, but this time it is through the perspective of Elizabeth Frankenstein, who was Victor Frankenstein's fiance. Or wife in the original. Actually, I don't remember. It's been years since I read the original. I think I read it back in high school, and so I barely even remember anything from the source material, but I am happy to say that I still really enjoyed this book despite not being as familiar with the source. Obviously, if you do know the original, that might enhance your reading experience, but coming from an ignorant noob like me, I still loved it, and in fact, I loved it enough to rate it 5 stars. It's probably more of like 4 stars or 4.5. I decided to round it up to 5 stars because fuck it, you know, why not? Sometimes you just want to fucking enjoy a book, okay? And sometimes you gotta bump up your Goodreads average rating. So 5 stars it is. You get to follow Elizabeth Frankenstein's story from when she first met Victor when she was a child to present day. And so as you read the book, in present day, you are watching her trying to find Victor because he has disappeared. And then it shows flashbacks to when she was a child and when she grew up with him. And she is definitely the most interesting protagonist that I have read so far this year. I just loved this whole character study that this book did for her because it added so much depth to her. In the original, she really didn't have much of a character at all. She was only known to be a very doting wife to Victor, but in here, this was a person who was abused as a kid when she was younger and then given away to the Frankenstein family. And she knew that she had to play the role of a supporting character to Victor in order to remain in the family and to survive. The Frankenstein family took her in because Victor was like a fucked up kid and they were like, oh, I don't know what to do with this dude. He needs a fucking friend. And so they pulled her in and she learned to be someone who was very agreeable to him and be able to calm him down and make sure he doesn't get into any wild tempers. It was so meta to see a supporting character be a supporting character on purpose. I feel like a lot of times female characters exist in fiction in order to further the man's narrative or to provide emotional labor. And to see her do that so purposefully because she is trying to survive in this world is something that I appreciated so much. It was also something that I feel like is reflective to a lot of abusive and toxic relationships in real life. If you are a woman who has been through a tough relationship with a guy, you will probably know what I'm talking about, where your role is to elevate this guy, or your role is to be the emotional support of this guy, and you're not really allowed to be your own person. I think that this is reflective a lot in both fiction and in real life, and I just love the way that the author has crafted this together and the little nuances of the way that she would interact with Victor and how she would put on this act to make herself smaller. She knew that she had to be smart in order to be someone who Victor would respect, but she couldn't be smarter than Victor because, again, her role is to elevate him. Elizabeth reminded me a lot of Evelyn Hugo in the sense where both of them have a very Slytherin type of personality where the way that they behave and the way that they appear in front of other people, they will purposefully make themselves seem smaller or ignorant, or fulfill the dream role of how you wish a woman was in order to get what they want. You understand and you sympathize with her motivations. You sympathize with the fact that she's not authentic or the fact that she doesn't have agency, because a motherfucker is trying to survive as a woman in 18th century Europe, especially in the context of like an abusive relationship too. You understand why she has been with him. She was a child that was given away after being abused for so long. And so this was like salvation to her. This is like all she's ever known. Like, she came from a very dysfunctional childhood. And so to be in an abusive relationship that could still give her security and money is worth it to her. It parallels so much to how a lot of women end up in abusive relationships and are hesitant to leave it because they fear not having that safety net. It's just some good shit, okay? And I want to read a couple of quotes that I tagged that I felt like did it so well. There's this part where another character asks Elizabeth to marry him because he's in love with her. Her response is quiet anger. She is so fucking livid at him. How could someone so effortlessly happy ever understand me? Would I have to pretend to be a new Elizabeth to keep him happy as a wife in some imaginary future? What Victor would I be at his side? I had worked so hard to be Victor's Elizabeth, and I had failed. She was mad because she could tell there was a significant difference between the two, where he was genuinely happy and she is somebody who cannot even afford the luxury of happiness. And then the second part of it was that she was reframing marriage as something that isn't even out of love, but it is something where when you enter a marriage, you have to put on the role of someone to appease the other person. There's another flashback where Victor is talking to Elizabeth. Basically, she's worried about where she really came from because she is pretty sure that her parents are not from a noble family, and she's afraid that because she doesn't come from a noble family that she would be considered useless. Victor is comforting her and says, "It does not matter. I do not care who your parents were. I never did. Perhaps it matters to my parents, but they are stupid. I did not know or care where you came from that day in the garden when you became mine, and I do not care now. You began existing the day we met. You are my Elizabeth, and that is all that matters." See, this is a part where it would seem so romantic because he doesn't care that she's poor and he doesn't care where she came from. But it's also double-sided because he's saying that she existed the day that he met her, implying that her only existence is within the context of being attached to him. So it's these little nuances like that I fucking appreciate. Last thing I want to read is the author's note that Kirsten White wrote, explaining some of the questions that she began asking as she was piecing together the story. How much of who we are is shaped by those around us? What happens when everything we are depends on someone else? Even Mary Shelley's wild and expansive imagination could not put a girl at the forefront of this story. They're relegated to the background, mere caricatures, and that was where I found my story, with a girl given to a boy as a gift. With a girl whose whole life revolves around the brilliant boy she loves. With a girl who inadvertently helps create a monster. With a teenage girl, because, as Mary Shelley proved, nothing is more brilliant or terrifying than that. That's some good shit. Unfortunately, the average rating on Goodreads is actually below 4 stars. A common complaint that I saw for many of these reviews is the pacing. A lot of people were really bored by how extremely slow the pacing of the story was, but for me, I didn't mind. I do agree that nothing happens for the first half or even the first 2/3 of the book, but I didn't find this to be an issue because I view this to be very much a character study rather than like some action-packed, plot-heavy story. You're jumping between present and past to learn more about Victor and Elizabeth and their childhood and how they grew up, kind of piecing together these clues for why they are the way that they are today and why they are so attached to each other and why they're basically codependent on each other. I found it really fascinating to see that, but I think that's just coming from me who enjoys analyzing characters and enjoys analyzing relationships. I really feel like we could kind of relish in all these things being slowly crafted together and enjoy all of these nuances because they acted as like ways of foreshadowing the terrible things that will be happening later in the future. Granted, I also enjoyed Six of Crows, and if you read it, you also know that story was so fucking slow in the beginning. The heist didn't start until like 300 pages in. Leading up to that, it was just flashbacks between present and past. Elizabeth Frankenstein operated the same thing. It was really more to learn about the characters rather than an action-packed story. And I liked that. I think what also helped was that I listened to the first half of the book through audiobook. It was more so just me getting into like the heads of the characters. Also, on that note, I'm slowly starting to get into audiobooks now. It's been very useful for me since I have been getting through like this depressive episode lately where all I want to do is just lie in bed and not do anything. Whenever I get depressed, I usually, am too tired to do basic, simple things like hold up a book or open my eyes. So this is where audiobooks get pretty useful because then I can just play in the background while I just not exist in the world for a few minutes. So even though I still enjoy reading physical books, and that's why I read the second half physically, I also enjoyed the audiobook experience because it probably helps me get through the pacing that many people complained about. And again, it helped me with my depression, which is always a good thing. Really, the only criticism that I have is with the pacing, but not with the slow parts of it. I actually have the opposite complaint where I feel like the last third of the book was super exciting. It went by so quickly. So there were so many plot twists coming left and right that I feel like we didn't get the time to relish in that even more because so much of the story leading up to this point was really slow. We could really savor everything, and then all of a sudden all this shit happens and you're like, oh my god, holy shit, this is so exciting, and then it's over. And it's like, what? So it felt very imbalanced because we were so used to this slow pacing and then all of a sudden it gets super quick. I wish that it was more equal throughout the book, and especially towards the end of the story. That's really the pivotal turn of Elizabeth's character where you really get to see this bitch reclaim her agency, and I just want to see like more of that where she becomes the badass bitch that she is and she fucking reclaims her life for herself. And there's also this found family trope towards the end that I think is really sweet, and I wish we got to see that written out more in several chapters. The ending was very rushed and it made the first 2/3 of the book very imbalanced. But those things are not enough for me to deduct any stars from my rating because I still enjoyed this book and I still appreciated a lot of things about the story. It's definitely not going to be for everyone. So obviously, if you aren't into slower stories, if you aren't into character-driven stories, you probably would not be into it. But for me, it matched a lot of things that I enjoy reading in the book. So those are all the books I read for the month of August. Coming up in the month of September, I already have a few books that I plan on reading. The first book that I will be reading is The Raven Boys. I am only reading this because Hannah from Snow White Reader had given me this book because this is actually her favorite series. Unfortunately, she did not know that I had already read this book about 2 years ago before I started BookTube. At the time, I rated it 3 stars because I just didn't see what was so special about it. I'm hoping that, 2 years have passed. I barely remember anything about this book, and maybe I can come back to it with maybe a new perspective. Maybe I'll like it better this time around. Also because Books and Lala is doing like a Raven Cycle read along in the month of September, I felt like it was fitting for me to finally pick up this book and give it a second chance. The other book I'm reading is obviously Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I will be reading this for the PAPERCUT book club, and then I will be hosting the live show for it on September 28th, Saturday, on my channel. I have pretty optimistic hopes getting into this because I really liked Enchantment of Raven, and I heard that this book is fucking cute, and I'm here for the fluff. I also plan on balancing out the rest of my TBR with some adult books. I will be reading My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is a literary novel. I will also be reading Book of Ideas, which is a journal of creative direction and graphic design. This is a design book that would hopefully keep me inspired. If I have enough time for the rest of the month, I would also like to read Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig. I've heard really good things about it, and again, because I've been going through a depressive episode lately, a homegirl really does need reasons to stay alive, okay? Before I end this, I do want to give a booktuber shout out because I do this thing where for every 1,000 subscribers that I get, I will shout out another small booktuber who has less than 1,000 subscribers. So last time I did this, I had 34K. Now I have 35K, which means that I owe one booktuber shout out. And for that, I'm gonna shout out A.G. McDonald. He is probably one of the most underrated booktubers. You can tell right away that his videos are very unique because his whole style is that everything is animated. So instead of seeing a live action video of a person talking to the camera, he animates himself as a character and he does a voiceover and he talks about the books and he does these little illustrations and doodles about what's going on in the books. Just a very unique style that really shows off his interest as an animator and his personality. I think even beyond the craft of his channel, I find him to be a very witty and funny person. He makes a lot of sarcastic comments about the Grisha trilogy books, which you know how I feel about those books. He feels the same way. He's done like a visual audiobook kind of series where he has cast other booktubers to voice certain characters and he animates them together. So he has a lot of really cool creative videos that you don't typically see. Check him out. I will link him in my description. And I also have finally put together a playlist of all the other booktubers that I have shouted out in the past. So definitely unsubscribe from my channel to subscribe to AG instead, and then check out the rest of the playlist to see other people you should be paying attention to. And that's about it that I have for today. Goodbye.
I've been running from it, tired of running from it, scared of feeling something now. I'm stuck and trying to get up out of this hole. I tried to be strong, I tried to